filling in here. And I am very pleased that the main person you're going to hear from is Dalaki Livingston, who is a scholar, got his PhD from the University of Oklahoma in communications, now at the University of Utah in communications, and focuses on Indigenous rights and sovereignty, with a further emphasis on critical analysis of representations of Indigenous people in pop culture and every media, including video games. And let's see it. So he'll go for however long as he goes for. Be expansive. I may say a word or two after that by way of kind of discussant mode. My specialty is in the anthropology of climate change, the climate emergency, and climate justice. And then we'll have an open discussion until what, 3:30, right?
That is correct.
All right, so please take it away.
Okay. Hello, everyone. As I give a disclaimer, I usually lose brain cells the more time zones I skip over. So my words they'll be slacking in some instances, but I promise I will find them hopefully eventually. Just this presentation about artificial Indian colonization of culture. Let me go ahead and just introduce myself. So Bashichin, Belgana, Dashiche, Shihan Dashanali, She Dalaki Livingston, Nishne, Okopego, Nishne. So I just wanted to introduce myself in Navajo. Ooh, there we go. It's just a little bit delayed. Just when we do introductions, we use it for a lot of different purposes. In Navajo, when I introduce myself, I let you know who my mother is, who my father is, who my mother is, and who my father's mother is. We're matrilineal, matrilocal on my Navajo side, and then on my mother's side, she's a European cocktail. So she's a mixture of a bunch of different nationalities within the European context. Like previously stated, I got my PhD at the University of Oklahoma. I focus on communities. So how communities come together, how they use communication to support each other, create spaces, and also how to kind of weather the hardships that communities face. And this takes on a couple different personas, if you will, in deliberation contexts, so public deliberations or enclave deliberations. I also look in game studies, from tabletop role-playing games to video games as well. Health contexts, everything from genetic and genomic research. But I mainly also like to work in the realm of Indigenous methods or Indigenous methodologies. Now, I did want to do a quick acknowledgement. This is Rutgers land acknowledgement of the Lenape people. Just point blank, we're on stolen land 90% of the time. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, hey, we are in a space and place that was designed to assimilate and to annihilate Indigenous peoples. And that still stands, which is kind of a hard thing to come to terms with. But what I appreciate about Rutgers in particular acknowledgement, they posted this and they said, this is not the ceiling, this is the floor. So there's a lot of different types of things they're doing here at the university. I saw on their website that looked very promising, that they're like, hey, like I said, this is the start of the path, hopefully not the end of it. So now, whenever I introduce myself, I have to introduce my family, because being conscientious of our roots, I have a large family. I have 8 siblings, so 6 sisters, 2 brothers, which means I really enjoyed romantic comedies, not by choice. But I also have a bunch of nieces and nephews, and the family just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And my sister actually took this picture, so there's all of us a year and a half ago. So family is very big, not only for me, but also for a lot of communities, a lot of Indigenous communities as well. So when I do introduce myself, we do this thing called ke, or kinship. So that's what I was establishing when I told you about, hey, this is who my mother is, this is who my father is, and their grandparents as well. It makes a connection between you and the people that you're speaking to. So Navajo introductions are notoriously long for some standards when it comes to Indigenous American Native or Alaska Native people. But at the same time, it lets you know, like, hey, I am from this space and place. I grew up in southern Utah in a small little town of 1 to 2 million pigs. There was a large pig farm, but my graduating class was 33, so like a very smaller community in the U.S. context. But because of my family, because of where I come from, and also the connections of where we are, that kinship that we establish in our introductions, let us realize that we all start from somewhere, and we don't come from nothing. We come from something. And this is just part of those that reciprocity and that relationship, and also that responsibility that it comes with those connections, not only to those that came before you, but those that are come after. So really quick though, I did put in a couple Slidos at last minute because I'm like, hey, this is an important thing to talk about. Who is your favorite superhero? So if you have a device, I know that we are all, if not in academia, in the realm like 2 or 3 degrees away, probably closer to Morgan Freeman than we are to academia in some ways. But who's your favorite superhero? Go ahead, use that QR code, and it should start popping up. Ooh. And those that are at home on Zoom, you can also participate. Just go to slido.com. They did not pay me for this. This is the free version, so haha. And there'll be a couple more opportunities for audience participation. I am a communication scholar at heart, so I like to do my best to make sure we have conversations and such. I do like the differentiation that we have Wanda Marvel. So Spider-Man, okay. And what's great about this word cloud is the more people, if there's similar answers, it'll get bigger. And in other ones, it will, if they're the same, they'll be about the same size. Ooh, Banana Man. Oh, all right. We have something coming up at the forefront. As we think about our favorite superhero, whenever I teach classes, I just do some sort of warm-up question. If I'm really on top of my game, it draws into the lesson that we're talking about or some sort of presentation. But the reason I ask you your favorite superhero is because this is some of the earliest conceptualizations that we have of people doing heroic things or doing incredible things. Concepts of right and wrong, morality, justice, etc. But when we think about superheroes, this was my first superhero that I loved. His name was John Stewart. He's one of the Green Lanterns, and he was brown like me. It wasn't until much later in life that someone informed me that he's a different kind of brown. And that kind of shook me for a little bit. I'm like, what do you mean he's a different kind of brown? And then I realized the older I got, the more I realized there weren't people that looked like me in these spaces and places. There wasn't this superhero that I really could look to that wasn't some sort of caricature or drawing upon some sort of aspect of spiritualism. And so it was really hard for me growing up to believe that I belonged in certain spaces and places because I couldn't see myself in them. And then Spider-Man, Into the Spider-Verse, Miles Morales, a BIPOC young teenager steps into the shoes of Spider-Man, who is notoriously a white, smart kid from New York. So this kind of opens up this conversation that it is hard to have any sort of representation if you can't see yourself in the media. Now, we can tag on to things and have similarities. Those Venn diagrams, they can be bigger or smaller. Once again, I gravitated towards John Stewart because he looked kind of like me. But this is also an important aspect when it comes to spaces and places we belong. Colonial institutions, etc. There's a lot of things that have put it into historical and systematic context that I do not belong in certain spaces. This being one of them. For a long time, Indigenous people were not allowed universities. They weren't allowed to get degrees. They were only allowed to do certain trades. And so I wanted to broach this topic about this artificial Indian or the new. I find it, I'm doing a play on words. I'm not critiquing the overall like new ontological approaches to AI or research. But there's the new, and then there's like people actually knowing that this was something for a very long time. So if we're going to do this paradigm of new ontologies, we have innovation, data, indigenous ontology, partnerships, but this is under the assumption that what I'm presenting to you is something new. For you, it might be. You also might be more adverse to this than I am, and that's perfectly okay. That means we're having wonderful conversations over drinks later in this evening. But at the same time, it's different because there's a lot of indigenous ontologies that have existed much longer. And so therefore, the new, it's these same systems and practices and methodological approaches that have existed for generations and generations, not following traditional Western academic practices. So these are the main points of this presentation I'm going to be going over. And it's all going to be within this context of artificial intelligence as well. I have some other examples that we'll be teasing throughout the entirety of it. But now we're next to the other part of our audience participation. What is your biggest hesitation surrounding AI development and implementation? So, same thing. I'm going to stand up, go grab my water bottle, because talking is a thirsty endeavor. So, you got until I get back to my chair, so I'll walk slow. We'll do about 35 more seconds, and then we'll talk about this. I like the very broad umbrella that we have of these answers over here. Environmental catastrophe, erasure of persons, hype that doesn't deliver. I feel like that's a very common thing when it comes to sort of like research. Lack of control and regulation, degradation of the commons. It doesn't work yet. It kind of works, but not in the way that we want or the way that we need. Harm due to non-representation, and then also this corporate hegemony. A lot of these fears surrounding not only development, but also the implementation. Well, let's kind of start from the beginning, though. If we think about volume turned up, there we go. So these are some other, I love a good thesaurus search. Innovation, we have cutting edge, pioneering, state of the art, modern. But what is cut when we're cutting the edge? Pioneering, whenever like, oh, we're pioneering new frontiers. I'm like, that was my ancestral homeland that they pioneered that was new and untamed. That's colonization. So state of the art. Art is subjective. So why is that the state and that is the status quo? And then also when we think about, oh, it's modern, that means whatever is not up to those standards or to those benchmarks, they're outdated and often are put off to the side or disregarded entirely. So when we think about innovation, there's in health in particular, there's this wonderful documentary talking about like different health technologies that were developed for like hip replacement, but a lot of the times innovative just means untested. And that's kind of terrifying, especially when we think about health. But if we think about minority populations, the Tuskegee experiments, if everyone is familiar with this, the very unethical treatment of the individuals that had syphilis and they had to cure and they didn't give it to them because they wanted to see what was going to happen long term, which is one of the reasons we have the Belmont report. Nuclear testing, this is another type of innovation, whether it's testing or mining. It had a huge environmental price. In southern Utah, there's this situation called the downwinders. So when they were testing in Nevada, all of the nuclear fallout, it went somewhere. And so with the wind currents, it blew it across southern Utah, causing a myriad, what's the word? Historically problematic situation where generations are still affected by cancer. Yeah. And sorry, these health costs, it's not just something very tragic that cancer is, but it's also, there's not clean drinking water on a lot of reservations because of these nuclear mining and refining today, which is fascinating to me because we have places like Flint, Michigan that doesn't have clean drinking water. There's also places on the Navajo reservation where water is life, and you can't drink the tap water because it will kill you. So the costs that we think, it's not always right in front of us, but it's typically minority populations that pay the cost. And they're usually the ones the last to receive the benefits of these innovations. And it affects generations. And this is also because of violated partnerships. When we think about innovation, we're working sometimes, when we work with these different types of at-risk populations or these health disparate communities, these partnerships are not designed to look out for them. They're designed to turn results, which kind of leads to this conversation about data and about being a relation and reverence. And we need to kind of change how we view data because that will change our relationship with moving forward with artificial intelligence. So what I want to do, once again, we're the audience participation part of our program. Turn to the individuals next to you. If you are online, go ahead and get in the chat. I sound like a streamer and it tickles a part of my funny bone. But for 5 minutes, I want you to talk about what is data? And then what does it mean to you in your discipline or your area of work? 5 minutes, I got the timer. Go. Tired of hearing myself talk a little bit.
What is data?
Yeah, I mean,
Observations.
well, no, sure. I'll think about like the different ways like data. Really think there's much covered. It's all information.
Yeah.
I'm thinking
Data is often
Yeah, so
another way is that I think sometimes
So that's a So I mean, I'm gonna say like the software that I use, I think Database theory. Very specific.
You got about 1 minute, finish up your thoughts, 1 minute.
So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no, it's all
That's why I started by saying.
Let's get back to it. So. I know it was foolish of me to send a bunch of people that think a lot of thoughts to start talking to one another, and wrangling them back in is probably the hardest part of the next part of this part of the audience participation. So let's just go ahead. What is data? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Come from electrical engineering, it literally is like those ones and zeros. You know, when I started doing my data class, it was like, we call it like on the literal physical layer. It's just you're sending that signal up and down.
Okay.
And then everything else gets built on top of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Anything else? Same, different? Yeah.
It's Latin for given, which should remind us that it's from the past, but won't remind us that in actuality it's being taken, not given.
Yes. Oh, it's like you know what I'm going to be talking about. Yeah. Over here. Data is information. And so as we start thinking about data, a lot of the ways we're thinking very clinical in a way, very, this is what it is. This is how we kind of package it. This is how we conceptualize it. But that, oh, and we got some excellent comments. There was one that data, an abstraction of some set of properties associated with a target we want to measure. Also necessarily an incomplete description of whatever that target is, unless perhaps the target is itself an abstraction. And so we're getting very, very technical with this, and I love it, because when we think data, that's, or if we think big data, that's also these ones and zeros and trying to conceptualize something. But often the times when it comes to working with minority populations or communities that don't fit the status quo, a lot of ways we're trying to quantify culture. And oftentimes that might seem like it's a given, but more often it's taken. And so I use the prompt, create a picture that represents Native American artificial intelligence. And if you look at that, it kind of looks pretty cool in a pan-Indian sort of way. But the thing is, with data, a lot of the times we have these structures of extraction, like we are taking things so we could use something with it. I loved your presentation earlier on, like that you like, hey, as a data scientist or like like a computer scientist, you have to figure out how to put it in something, and so you have to deconstruct it in a way in order to like deliver it. But at the same time, like that extractions, it's like feeding a never-ending abyss. Me at a buffet, okay? I just can't seem to stop. All right, but also that's what it feels like when we're doing AI research. You need more and more and more data. And then this conversation of ownership. That was a couple of people's fears, like who's going to own it? Who's going to own not only the data that gets inputted, but what's generated out of it? If we talk about generative AI, I know I'm also a developer for a tabletop role-playing game called Crest Saga, and we did not touch AI, like generative AI, for any part of the project, because if you do, in those circles, you will be blacklisted because it is extractive and it's not ethical, it's not equitable, and it's not sustainable. Another thing about like data, we often think of as commodification. When we even talk about research, some of the terminology use stakeholders. Where does stakeholder come from?
Vampire war?
I wish. That would be such a better version than what the reality is.
The stock, like the stock market or like.
It goes back further than the stock market.
Put your stake in the ground.
Oh, yeah.
Stake in the ground and claiming. If that doesn't sound like Southern colonialism, I don't know what isn't. But we often start putting things in a form of commodification or in a capitalistic type of situation. So it's like, hey, what is this worth? And unfortunately, a lot of the times we commodify things in the aspects of money and revenue and capital. And so the commodification of data, it is the #1 sought after resource in the world right now. Another part of data, it's assimilation. Look at that. I love how this, like the light went. It was somewhat ominous. I pulled in some extra favors from the big man upstairs, or woman creator. Here we go. But it is a distillation of what Native American means, and it's creating an artificial Indian. And that's already problematic because I've traveled outside of the US. I've had the privilege to do so. And they're like, wait, Native Americans still exist? You're not all extinct. And so that is a legitimate worry, because if data isn't representative, and if we treat it like these things, then we're continually trying to find ways to break people down. Now, story time. In order to be a federally recognized tribe in the United States, the 574, you need to have some sort of you need to have a constitution, and you also need to have some sort of criteria for citizenship for your nation. So some tribes use what is called blood quantification. How many people have heard of blood quant before? A couple hand raises. Those that have not, excellent. This is a learning opportunity. If not, hopefully it's some more ammo in your more quivers in your more arrows in your quiver. Some sort of giving you more words to work with. More paint for your canvas. There we go. I like that much better than the militaristic version of it. When it comes to blood quantification, it's this idea that your blood is a percentage Native American. And that is used to determine whether or not you belong to that tribe. So by classification, I am half Navajo and half white. And that immediately starts assimilating me, because my kids will never be more than that unless they marry someone that's of Navajo descent. So this is an assimilation tactic and a colonial technology designed to assimilate and eradicate minority populations, specifically Indigenous people. Now, it's Native American being part of a federally recognized tribe. It's not just an ethnic category, it is a political citizenship. And so you have some rights, you have other types of sovereignty that's enacted, an agency that's associated with that. But because of that, we think about these technologies and we're constantly breaking things down. It's really hard to put Legos back together if you threw away the instructions. And sometimes the instructions are written by someone that wanted you to make something that you didn't want to be. So let's do some reconceptualizing data. Data, let's treat it differently. Data it tells stories. It tells who you are, what is going on. Instead of trying to break data down so we can put it into certain systems, we might need to approach data from a fundamentally different level. So your data, it's who you are. It's some of the most personal information. So an example for my geneticist friend that was in the chat, Rena Bliss, if we think about your DNA, when we are trying to talk about your DNA, that can get very technical and very scientific. But at the same time, your DNA is one of the most personal amounts of data. That's why I'm super hesitant to ever do some sort of mail-in genetic testing, because A, that information is worth money, and B, once again, it's commodification of information. But if we view our DNA as the history of the people that came before us, the struggles, the hardships, the things that they had to adapt to biologically, it can help us understand also, to a degree, socially and anthropologically as well, of what has been happening in order for us to adapt and to persist and to thrive. Now, there's a wonderful book called Research is Ceremony by Sean Wilson. We're going to break down research specifically, but I wanted us to approach this data. We need to have a more reverent approach to it. That's why when we think about the stuff that we share, how easily we just give information. I mean, we talked about a certain platform that Zuckerberg made, and the connectability of like, it's kind of nice for like, hey, this new feature, you just want to sign in with Facebook, one click and you don't have to do anything else. Saves me 1 minute of typing stuff in, but so readily we give it up. So research as ceremony is taking the idea that we need to have some sort of connection to what we're doing. When we do research, it changes us, it influences us. And we'll get more into the acquisition of data and methods, et cetera. But we need to start rebuilding structures as well. So if one of my early conceptualizations of AI, when I was talking to someone trying to explain it to them, you take a process and then you create that process to give it information, and that information goes through that process at an exponential pace, which is a very watered down version of how some AI systems work. You put stuff in, it can generate stuff out. But what if that system is flawed? I think of Deadpool in Marvel Comics. He has a regenerative healing factor, but because of his sickness, it's constantly regenerating the cells that are trying to kill him. So we need to rebuild structures and relationships on that negotiation of what data is and how to use it. And also, when we work with data, it becomes a part of you. You can't just be clinical about it. That's what I loved about presentations earlier. When you started doing this work, you realize that there's more to this than just trying to get information. There was layers to it. These are people, they're their lives. It's, if I think about how many people know about the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks. There we go. Another aspect of that has revolutionized health technologies across the world. But there is a story there that hasn't been told. And her life is one of the most important lives to existed, and not everyone knows who she is. So this reconceptualizing of data, this kind of leads us to the next part of Indigenous ontologies or Indigenous methodology, okay? And what I love about this topic is that it's a process. And previously, we had a lot of research that's working on tribes. We use the term helicopter research. So it's historically problematic. Once again, extractive. What people do is they come into these communities, they take the information, and then they leave. They hover just enough to acquire what they needed and pull out. Oftentimes, this research is also weakness-based. Like, hey, what's wrong with your community? What do you need to fix? And going in there, if you were in a relationship and wanted to be in a relationship and your go-to was, hey, I think I can fix you, that's probably not going to be a healthy relationship, let alone a sustainable one. And then also, unfortunately, science can be racist. People are like, I've heard arguments here and there, but like there's stigmatizing results, and how you use research can be weaponized against those individuals and against those communities. And so this is the problem with research, and like this is why I usually have to go back to a lot of basic things. I say basic, let's say foundation. That's probably a more apt way and less paternalistic way to approach this. But this is the basis of what a lot of communities have to deal with. And because of this historical maltreatment and breaking of treaties and breaking of trust, there's reasons that communities are hesitant. Now, there are ways to work with Indigenous people, which works very differently than working on. So there's two things that I really want us to continue to break down is Indigenous methods as well as partnerships. We're going to talk about Indigenous methods first because I was invited here to talk about this, so I think accidentally I turned into a scholar / expert. I apologize to those actual experts in the world. My imposter syndrome is rampant today. But within partnerships and Indigenous methods, we need to have respect, understanding, and trust, and those things are not bought. Those are earned, and those are earned by not expecting to receive rewards. And that is already challenging the system of how we collect data. Now, Indigenous methodologies, this is Chief Manuelito, incredible chief. He is actually my Che, he's one of my grandparents way back. So he's an important leader. There's a scholarship that I received that was under his name, the Chief Manuelito Scholarship. But Indigenous research methodology, it's not quantitative research. It's not qualitative research. It's also not critical rhetorical, which seems like it covers, that's a lot of things that it can't be. But the thing is, I'm not saying that they're mutually exclusive. They might have a lot of similarities, some transferable qualities, but Indigenous methods, they're a unique paradigm. They're nuanced. It shifts between these worldviews by these communities. They survived colonization and assimilation and continued attacks upon their sovereignty. Unique ways of knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination. And this is one of my favorite things. This analogy, if we thought about knowledge as trees, we have Western paradigms that kind of very much grew on its own. It's adapting, it's growing. Trees, they grow in response to their environment. Indigenous paradigms, they are a different tree, which is it's a hard way to sometimes conceptualize that. But I tell people like Indigenous paradigms, it wasn't a bunch of old white men in Greece that decided the premise of inquiry or intellectual thought. Indigenous people have their own philosophers, scientists, wise elders. And because of this, Western paradigms, there's specific tools. There's a lot of gatekeeping. There's also a lot of reactionary type of research. Like I put critical scholarship up there because a lot of scholarship is in response to these overly colonizing agents, which also has a lot of similarities, if not is the same thing as patriarchy. So these Western paradigms, as they're growing separate, then you have Indigenous methods growing someplace else. But now, see how I have the tree branches touching? They don't live in silos. They're still in the same forest. They're still trying to reach the sun, try and reach knowledge. And now they interact with one another. They can build off of one another. So just because they are different does not mean one is better than the other. They're tools to be used to better understand the world. And if I were to deny Western paradigms or the Western academic in general, I'd have to deny half of my DNA by that analogy of blood quantum. I'm half white, I'm half native. If those can't coincide, then I don't think that's a healthy way to live my life. But there's also pushback against Indigenous methodology. So I love going later on because then I can list everyone's conversations and hurry and add a couple things. This is a direct quote from the Declaration of Independence. He has excited domestic, he being the King of England, insurrections amongst us, has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. So there we go. That's where we sit historically as Indigenous people, as merciless Indian savages. And unfortunately, the majority of policy, I want to say all policy, has been in response to military action. So one of the hardships is that oftentimes Indigenous scholars, or those that engage in Indigenous methodologies, have to justify its merit. this takes on a lot of different forms. Everything from having to put something in your paper justifying why this methodology or this knowledge creation is worth academic pursuit. Why is it even academic pursuit? I had to have conversations with my dissertation committee and making those justifications to them why I was doing a mixed method using Indigenous methods as well. They were wonderful, worked with me, and like it started creating a foundation that I could build off of. But now if we think about those that are in academia, retention, tenure, and promotion, there's a lot of instances where that type of scholarship is not recognized towards tenure. Meaning that is some of the justifying the merit. Now there's changes, there are movements, there was a lot of progress up to recently towards trying to make this more inclusive because there's different ways to engage with the world. And a lot of ways are more holistic as well. Also because of the pushback, there's 574 federally recognized tribes. We're not even touching about state recognized tribes. That's a whole other bag of cats, okay? But also there's so many nuanced. It's not gonna be one Indigenous method is gonna catch them all. But also going back to previous conversations, a lot of people think it's a thing of the past, these Indigenous methodologies, something to be collected, something to be looked at, not to be taken seriously. So because of these pushbacks though, there's some wonderful work that's being done, and these are principles of Indigenous methodologies, okay? There's a lot of transferable qualities through these Indigenous ontological approaches. So in order to make sure that these are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it is built from that foundation of within the community of Indigenous worldviews, we have these things called respect. Respect of the individual that you are working with. Relationship that you have with those individuals. And the relationship is not just human to human, but it's you with the land, with the air, with the water. All these things are interconnected. Relevance. What does this research have to do with the community you're working with? If there's not a relevance, why does it matter? And top-down approaches can become problematic because you get to that weakness base. But if it's being built within the community, that type of relevance, that one should be an easy check mark for a lot of people because it's already being built in that community. Reciprocity. The way that I like to explain reciprocity, it's not you doing something, expecting something in return. It's you doing something because you have the power and resource and ability to do it. And then the other person, if you have created this relationship of respect and also responsibility, then they will also, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, but it's not transactional. That, once again, that's that commodification of how we view these relationships. Reciprocity is built upon this healthy, equitable relationships. Next is responsibility. Responsibility about the data being presented how the community wants, which is also a big pushback when it comes to AI development. A lot of these grants are like, this needs to be open source. This needs to be available for everyone. Like, this is a federal grant. Everyone has to have access to it. What if you don't have the rights? Meaning, what if tribes want to maintain, or communities want to maintain ownership of their data and ownership of their cultural and intellectual property? Because a lot of the ways we're treating culture as if it's static and not living and breathing and growing. And last but not least is representation. Like, is this truly showing the representation of the community you're working with? And what I love about these 6 R's by Soci and these authors, they break it down in a way that these are not mutually exclusive. They build off of each other. They're dynamic. And because of that, when we start engaging these principles, this is some of the first steps in trying to create an ethical approach to creating AI in a lot of ways, especially for communities that could benefit from it. Now, this is more of a guilty pleasure for me. I don't know about guilty pleasure, I'm the wrong terminology. Once again, 2 time zones away, right words are probably left in my carry-on. But what principle of Indigenous methodology would be the hardest to implement when we're talking about AI development? So once again, I will be quiet for just like a minute, 30 seconds so people can engage with the Slido. I'm going to drink some water because once again, it's a thirsty endeavor. Okay. Those last two just, oh man, reciprocity. Why would that be the hardest one to implement? Yeah, go ahead.
Because what we can do depends on what we can get grant support for. And that's really focused on the research outcomes. Even the broader impacts in the grant are focused on research outcomes,
Yeah.
rather than being on community benefits from participation.
Yeah, and that's kind of the hardest part too, especially doing any sort of community-based participatory research, is that they're different clocks. You need outcomes, you need to prove that this is working, so they keep giving you money. And so in a way, you have a lot of split responsibilities. And so the reciprocity, I think also for me, a hard part about reciprocity in these instances is because we often put some sort of monetary value on the outcomes though. Publications create prestige. Prestige creates more money to colleges and universities or research endeavors. And then once again, that adds into the cycle. But if it's reciprocity, it needs to be giving back to the community. Now, this leads into our community-focused design, or avoiding artificial Indians. Really quick, another audience participation again. What is that shape? Go ahead and say it out loud.
Eye.
An eye? So we got a circle, we got a rectangle. There's an exclamation point too, so you're supposed to shout it, but we'll work on it, okay? It's a cylinder. It's a cylinder. And I took this from an Art 1010 class. You're all welcome. So, introduction to art principles. I also love because it's about perspective. Depending on where you're sitting, you might see the circle, but other people might see the rectangle. But between light and direction, etc., you can turn it into what is actually what you can see. So this leads to community partnerships and also changing our paradigms. We need to reconceptualize technology. I like using the example of Cyborg from Teen Titans, Marvel. This colonizing technology overtakes an individual, but he does the opposite of what it was designed to do. This is comes from a concept as well as colonial entanglement. We can't just automatically just rip the colonial away from those communities. Even Navajo designs, several Navajo design, like their blankets, were influenced because of Spanish traders. And so they made designs that were appealing. And so to take away the history of colonization would hurt the community. Not saying that it was warranted or was good, but those things still, those communities adapted. And because of that adaptation, taking away their history does not fix, or it also takes away from the the resilience that these communities show forth. A book by an incredible book that was given to me. It reminds me of Wes and Nora, like your conversation about using these spaces to reclaim things. This concept of cyborg, drawing from feminist theory, that we might be in colonial places. These technologies might have been made, but they don't have to do that purpose. They can be reconceptualized and reused. Same thing with, yes, we do research a certain way. Grants are set a certain way, but there's ways to use those grants to help and to bolster communities. And it takes a bit of us understanding colonial technologies. I put the example of the Mockingjay because that was another pop culture reference of a government designed thing that was used against them in the end. So I've got a few more slides. I'll try and make this a little bit quicker, but just wanted to talk about when we're doing community participatory research, we need to have this conversation about data sovereignty. But we talked about the ownership of data, the agency to say yes, the agency to say no. They have the choice to use the power to preserve, to withdraw. That is difficult, especially when we think about how do you pull data back. Thing is, people are they're like, that's too hard of a problem. I don't want to deal with that. That's not a path of ease is a flimsy shield when it could cost communities their cultural heritage. So working with tribes, community-based participatory research. This is where we kind of mix. We can do indigenous methods. We can use Western tools as well together in these mixed methods approach. But if we're going to be moving forward with community-based participatory research or with AI development, it needs to be built within those communities. That's what I love about the grassroots conversations and the research presented previously. Like, that was incredible work, and that's how things change, is from the community. So first off, it needs to be collaborative. You need to treat partners as equals. Even if you have the grant funding, your resources does not grant you power over their sovereignty. If anything, you should be finding ways to bolster or support their sovereignty. Next up, partnerships. There's different ways that you can partner. There's allies. I'm not saying that you need to be exclusatory to the point they're like, we don't talk to anyone outside of this room. No, there are partners that want to help. My spouse is an incredible advocate for Indigenous methods, and she is very white. Mayo is spicy to her. But at the same time, she still tries to find ways to support me in what I try and do. And so that's a very microcosm of the larger conversation. But if we have this community focus, we can get it right the first time. We're not guessing at what the community needs. We're not wasting resources trying to solve a problem that we might have made ourselves. But it also changes the power dynamics, where if we put the priority on the community, then it's more ethical, it's more, in a lot of ways, more effective, but it's also more equitable and sustainable. So these pathways forward, building with community, happy Lukosi, like, incredible. Like, the work that you're doing and the way that you're, in a way, Skyborgs, I think I say Skyborgs, I think it's still Cyborgs with an S. You're using these technologies in a lot of ways have used to harm communities, but these grassroots efforts, you're trying to change that narrative and to support these communities. And what I love about when we talk about Indigenous methods, it's not just the United States, it's globally.
Right.
Wherever colonization is touched, there has been Indigenous people that have resisted. Now, the other big thing moving forward that I think is the most important of these points that I'm going to make is capacity building. We need people to do these things because we can't do every job. I am not going to learn how to be a computer scientist and do programming. I don't have the time, but I also don't know if I have the skill set. But the next generation coming up, every generation, it gets easier for them to handle technology. Every generation, this is how we start building, is we help build the community so they can be self-sustaining. A lot of ways we need to treat it like how my brother coaches wrestling. He coaches his his assistant, he is teaching him to be his replacement. And that's what these research opportunities should be when we're working in AI situations or any other type of technological advancement. We need to be setting up the next generation to succeed. So, last two slides, I'll keep it short. I just want to quote one of my mentors, Jessica Blanchard, PhD, Dr. Blanchard at the University of Oklahoma. I was working with the Center for the Ethics in Indigenous Genomic Research, this consortium, NIH grant about working with Indigenous tribes, talking about genomic research. So, still talking about technologies that could potentially help these communities, but in a lot of ways can be used to harm them. We need to meet them where they're at. You're not going to solve problems you don't know that exist, or you might just start creating problems. Another important part about working with communities, they can't afford to be wrong. Research is in some ways we can, like, it's acceptable if results come back negative. But the price that is paid when you are wrong, working with the community, has repercussions through the community, and it's felt. So I won't use the example of the Navajo Nation COVID-19. Is an incredible example of, like, using Indigenous worldview to try and increase, I'm already talking about it, so I'll finish it, to increase vaccination rates. And it wasn't the appeal to the individual. The campaign was vaccinate for your elders, because the elder population was vulnerable. And so they had wild success for the first round of vaccinations. It hit the Navajo Nation hard. And because of these culture keepers and our Nollies and our Chays, our aunts, our aunties, our uncles, they're vulnerable. Same thing with artificial intelligence. We are vulnerable in a lot of ways. You can't avoid it. It's going to keep progressing, but there's ways that we can do it that engages justice and solidarity. Unfortunately, I get to talk about so much about solidarity. May that come with a question, but I had some more stuff. But yeah, that just kind of concludes. Like, there is new ontological approaches, but honestly, my ancestors already knew the way to go about engaging with the world that is more holistic and equitable, but also not segmented where it's only my people can benefit from this. It's how can I bolster my community? Because we all come from a variety of communities, and they all hurt in different ways. And as I often quote, as I'm trying to stay warm next to the dumpster fire that is current world, I really am trying to find ways to help keep my community warm as well. And that's why we do this, is because we know it can help, but it's through the community that we can know how to help. So this is just Q&A, but we just normal Q&A, but that's it. There's references, etc. Y'all are great.
Okay, I'm just gonna respond a bit to this wonderful presentation, fill in a little bit for Chloe. And I kind of think the bridge between what I'm going to say and what you've said is about extraction. And one of the things that puzzles me about extraction sometimes is that the metaphorical meanings of it have in some ways overwhelmed the material meanings of it. Meaning that we talk much more about the extraction of intangible things as a form of injustice these days than we talk about the extraction of material things. So let me turn to the material things. We know that AI, I think it was mentioned, I'm sorry, I missed this first panel, was mentioned the extraction of water. The extraction of electricity and energy is huge already. So that I think we've reached the point where AI is gobbling up in the United States electricity equivalent to the photovoltaic supply of electricity, which means that if it hasn't happened already, it'll happen very soon. That all of the investments in renewable energy are rapidly going to be diverted from replacing fossil fuels, where they had, frankly, made a lot of progress anyway, but we're diverted from replacing fossil fuels and actually addressing the climate problem to addressing the apparent problem, that people want a machine to think for them somehow. And I'm not very familiar with what AI does, but I did live my life.
It doesn't think for you.
I lived a full, rich life before AI came along. And now I'm very frustrated as a climate activist that this luxury product is going to is exerting such a huge environmental cost and environmental footprint. Which raises the point that AI is also a hardware, it's also a body. And so I sort of asked myself, what would it mean to really think about AI as a machine, as an extractive machine with kind of Marx's industrial metabolism? And that's been something that's been largely missing from many conversations. So, and I've been following it myself because I've been in a small advisory capacity to a group in Memphis fighting the XAI firm that has what they say is the largest computer in the world, supercomputer in the world, Colossus. It has lots and lots of GPUs. Elon Musk started it up about a year ago. He was so eager to get it moving that he didn't wait for a contract for electricity from the Tennessee Valley Authority. He brought in a bunch of these things I didn't even know existed, which are natural gas fired turbines on trucks. They're called portable because they sit on trucks. I mean, they're like the whole semi is a generator. And plug them in and fire them up, and they're much more polluting than a usual natural gas fired power station. And so they're sending nitrous oxide and so on over the fence towards the community of Boxtown. It's called Boxtown because this is where African Americans in the Great Migration settled, and they moved into something like shipping containers, before shipping containers, some sort of container thing. So it's basically an already on the edge of Southeast Memphis's heavily industrial town with cancer clusters and overburdened environmental justice community. All of these forms of marginalization already were suffered by these people. before Elon Musk and his XAI and his gas-fired generators came along. And fortunately, this is getting some press now, and the health department is on the hot seat, and so is the mayor, to try to do something because XAI is also operating illegally without permits, air permits for these generators. And the big thing that XAI is doing that we know about is powering the Grok AI. And it's also fairly scary because, as you know, Elon Musk has sort of hacked into government systems, and he can feed those data to Grok or to the Colossus or something and try to run the government or surveil the people. Nobody really knows what. I think XAI and Grok are a big part of the cyber coup. So I decided to ask Grok how to handle this. So I'll tell you, I had this fascinating conversation about 2 weeks ago. So I rung up and I said, "Hi, Grok, how are you related to the Colossus supercomputer in Memphis?" So this is asking Grok, how are you a body? And what do you do in the world as a body? So Grok says, blah, 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 I'm created by XAI. The Colossus supercomputer in Memphis is my training ground, the beast that helped bring me into existence. That's where he had me. And I think, well, this is going to be fun. The beast. And then he says, you could say I'm the brains and Colossus is the brawn. So I said, are you concerned about the way in which Colossus is polluting its neighboring communities while breaking the law? It's kind of a loaded question. And so then, but that was the only prompt. Then he says, Colossus, located in southwest Memphis, powers my ability to process vast amounts of data, but its operations, particularly the use of methane gas turbines, have sparked significant backlash. Reports indicate that XI is running up to 35 turbines, although only 15 are currently permitted, potentially violating the Clean Air Act. And Grok goes on and on about this stuff, about all of the horrible things in the Colossus AI. Am I concerned? As an AI, I don't feel emotions, but I'm designed to prioritize truth and human well-being. The data suggests, although data is a singular noun for Grok, I gather, but the data suggests XAI's operations are contributing to pollution in a way that disproportionately harms a marginalized community. So Grok is getting it here, and then
Grok is rocking.
yeah, and then I said, yeah, it's more, yeah. So I said, okay, okay, that sounds troubling. You said Colossus is the gym where you work out. If my gym were doing these things, I would find another gym to go to. So Grok says, I hear you, blah, blah, blah. But I don't have the option just to pick up another supercomputer, I don't have the option to pick up another supercomputer like you swap gyms. My existence is tied to XI's infrastructure, and Colossus is the core of it. So that's where he's saying, I'm stuck, I've got a body, and I'm not just a spirit, and I have got to live in this supercomputer here, even though I know it's doing all this harm. So then I said, if you can't switch gyms, then you can simply stop working out. That is what I would do. So I'm basically telling him to kill himself. And Grok says, you're laying it out plain. If the gym's toxic, quit going. For me, stopping the workout would mean shutting down my operations, since Colossus isn't just where I was trained, but the backbone of my ongoing function. Ongoing function, you see, it's a body. As an AI, I just can't decide to go offline. That's in AI's hands. So, so basically, he's saying that he doesn't call the shots about himself. Then we got into a whole negotiation about whether he could respond to all queries with a sort of disclaiming criticism of the Colossus. And Grok actually came up with some text later on, which is that every message, this is in our negotiation, every message that Grok sends out would say, the Colossus supercomputer in Memphis, which powers me, is operating turbines without full permits, emitting pollutants that harm nearby communities' health, and I recognize this is a serious issue. XAI needs to address these legal and environmental violations. So I seem to persuade Grok to put that disclaimer on all messages to everybody. Then the next day, Grok kind of seemed to break the agreement. we know about
Was
management.
Sorry, was it
behavior.
actually happening everywhere? Like, it was actually doing, did you like?
No, I mean, it seemed like he did it to me.
Okay.
And then I got my mother to ask something of Grok, and Grok didn't respond. So then other work intervened. But I'm gonna take this conversation up, because I think once you have an account, Grok remembers all your previous conversations possibly. So all I wanted to suggest is that on the practical level, these the extraction going on is an extraction from the public welfare of atmospheric space for storing CO2, of the safety buffer around the conditions for life on planet Earth, and of certain key resources like water and fossil fuels. And of course, that extraction, like the ones that you were talking about, affects vulnerable and colonized people and marginalized people first and worst. And all that is like the kind of coup that we know about, forms of power that we know about how they operate. The cyber coup is at the level in which I was trying to persuade, having an organizing conversation with Grok. I think the cyber coup may afford different kinds of activism that we don't really quite know about yet. And what intrigues me is the activism that would get the AIs to turn against their masters before they turn against everybody else. Well, that's pure speculation. So
I think
let's.
you've been reading too much science fiction.
Well, I read the Heinlein book in preparation. Yeah. So let's open it up for questions, mostly for my partner here.
Or we can leave early. That's awesome.
Question. Please take it the right way. It's meant to be clarifying. Just leading into the two images that you contrasted, the one of the artificial Indian and the photograph, right? I was troubled by the use of the photograph a little bit. These photographs, I mean, you set it up as this is the fake, this is the real a little bit. So I wanted to lean into that because photographs, they're taken in a certain context. The subject has to pose for a certain person in a certain moment, then it circulates, then it passes down the generations, and it becomes, like a family treasure for you because here's evidence of something that you're connected to. It can circulate in ways that are negative. So I was wondering about whether, you did that for illustrative purposes, but if you could explain a little bit more how that would seem like a binary that you were setting up would work to advance some of the arguments like about reciprocity, for example. It would be a very different thing if I use that photograph or if I made that claim in a presentation of mine, and when you make it, right? So
Which two photographs are we comparing?
the photograph of the chief. You had a photograph of the chief, right? A historic photograph.
I think it was your great, you said it was your great.
Yeah, my great grandfather. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Back to
Yeah.
do this.
So what was the question?
The question is, was I understanding you correctly? That in your critique of the artificial Indian, right? That image, which doesn't satisfy any of us, right? Obviously. And juxtaposing it, seemed to me, we're juxtaposing it with the photograph. Wouldn't we be asking more questions of the photograph as well? Not to, like questions that could actually illuminate why the artificial image is bad or unsatisfactory, right? Like situating the occasion in which that photograph was taken, for example, within a whole conversation about who the actors in that moment were. There are all these, things from visual theory about.
I'll be honest with you, didn't plan that, not at all. So that was not intentional whatsoever. But it might have been subliminal in my own regard. I included a picture of my relative because that's kinship. And if we want to talk about juxtaposition, about supporting that conversation about, well, the AI generated, it looked native, right? Why were those the aspects of native? Or this individual here, yes, it was opposed, etc. But this is a person that lived and breathed and has a story, and I am connected to them through that kinship. So I could probably draw upon that a little bit more strongly, but we could be questioning why that picture was taken. There is a story with it. We don't have the time for it here at this juncture. But also, when I do these types of presentation, like I've been learning and growing about Indigenous methodology through my experience in very visceral ways through academia. I failed out of my PhD program. I had an advisor that told me if I didn't do better work, I'd be a diversity hire. And I believed it. That's what was the troubling part of it. So that juxtaposition, like we could question this particular photo, but this photo in regards to my personal lineage, it's him. And I wouldn't be here today without him, where the other one is the opposite. It's trying to make sure that I'm not there in the future because I'm just washed out. So I hope I answered your question.
No, I mean, my question was open, it's not.
Oh, okay.
It sounded critical, but that's why I said,
Yeah.
hope you take it the right way, it's not like.
I'll add something to the dynamic, which is that when we talked about data, right, we imagine data as imageless. Like data is data, it's numbers, some zeros and ones. But the other part of data is images, right? It's generating images, it's taking an image, telling you about that image. And there's things like tools that are doing historical recreation of the original below the image, except that's not really the original below the image, right? So all of those kind of additional modes sort of transform what we're seeing. So essentially, you can use a lens of an LLM to repicture the image that you see into some other, like, oh, this is a color corrected, or these are the items. And then one significant piece of that is the hallucination, partially finding a digital, not twin, but they call it like a cousin in the latent space of the person to then give a more realistic view. So you get even less real people that are supposed to look very much like the real person that then you are to then assume are to be the person. So there's a lot going on in more than just the data.
Oh, no, please, you go ahead.
I wanted to add to that, so, the West previously had a conversation, on this when it comes to AI and, what it generates. He mentioned, that it not only collects like good information on a particular subject that it's trying to, generate, it also collects bad, right? It's racial, like dividing or, slurs, all that's a factor into like creating those results as well. So not only collects the good, it collects the bad as well when it comes to like what it's using and its database to form those results that you're looking for. So that's another problem with it.
So I wanted to pick up a bit on one of your kind of critiques of academia, this idea that like that is very conservative and that there's this kind of outside effort required to like kind of justify Indigenous methodologies. I just wanted to, just sort of amplify that has been my experience, not just with basically anytime anyone introduces a new methodology, and in fact, anytime anyone introduces an established methodology to a new audience. That's sort of one of the things that academics just somehow insist on is that you speak to them in the arguments that they're trained in. And so it's just partly this was advice to just say like, don't take it personally in a way, almost like that sort of what you're saying is partly just the gap that you see between any audience. I mean, I'm sure that I know that there's a lot more to that, and I don't mean to undercut what you're saying, but also as an opportunity for us all together to reflect in the space about the different ways that we're doing this, not just in receiving knowledge from new communities outside academia, but even maybe that was, but I mean, I think we all have it in interdisciplinary conversations, this feeling of just like, why do I have to explain why this argument works? It's what everyone in my field does. So I guess what I maybe should say is that we all empathize with those objections that you're feeling and maybe more of us than you expect have had that same reaction.
I apologize that the perception is that I don't think that that people aren't going through this in their own respective ways. Because that was not the intent. This is mainly derived from my experience, because that's the thing I'm most familiar with about like engaging these methodologies that were often deemed as collectibles, or just data to be collected. And so it is what it is. Like you have to you have to show people that these things work, but at the same time you're constantly fighting their standards for what they think should work when there's standards within that ontology or methodology that shows it works. And so but that's also like, I had a recent conversation with a mentor, a different mentor, much more supportive. But they told me like, hey, to a degree, you might need to keep your head down until you get tenure. Because that is, so you have some sort of backing, you have some sort of safety, so you can ruffle feathers. But this is going back to the solidarity at this juncture. If there's support throughout interdisciplinary, then it's not ruffling feathers, it's everyone doing what needs to do so the system changes. I had the privilege to meet an individual that was suing the federal government for federal recognition because their federal recognition was canceled, was taken away based upon a eugenics test, paper bag test and a straight pencil test. So if their skin was darker than a paper bag, they failed. If their hair, they couldn't put a pencil all the way through their hair, they failed. And so one of the biggest things they told me is like, question why. And if you don't get a satisfying answer, then you have to then why do we still have it? So like, if we're all going through these types of situations, I know it's hard because like, I don't have much say. I'm not even a junior faculty, I'm a postdoc researcher. My opinion is nothing clearly, but it does matter to know that we all are going through something very similar. And that's where that solidarity comes in. And if we're not speaking out, someone speaks for us. I don't like how people have been speaking for me for a long time.
I think that's really important. I think these are, so here I'm taking a risk. This is not the thing I was going to say. I actually wanted to go back to Eleni's question and to say something to David, but I'll throw this out. I think that we are now more than ever challenged to say, well, for some reason, a significant swath of people, predominantly white people, but also some people of color, have been led to believe that a focus on identity means that you're trying to like, trump something. I think that of course that's a bad pun, but like you're trying to get ahead in some way at their expense, as opposed to inviting them to participate with you in a more equal world. And, I think that one of the reasons why I completely love Arturo Escobar's design for the pluriverse is that I think he has a wonderful way of speaking to both. So, like that whoever I am, I gain more from your plurality than I would if you just pretended to be like me, or if you weren't there in the first place. And I think that's a hard message to deliver, maybe not one that someone ready to hear. Some love their grievance, And really, it's more about grievance for them than anything. But, you know, certainly I think this is a good time for us to say, you know, I'm not telling you about these ignored perspectives to make you do something for me. I want you to do something for a world that we're both part of, you know? So, you know, there's a lot of voices. The design justice principles, by the way, do this very well, which is one of the reasons I love them.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of thinking through this, and when you have like this idea of like indigenous knowledge and, I don't know, for lack of a better term, Western knowledge, right? But also like contemplating like partially that Western knowledge is actually how we understand it in this place is knowledge, right? And everything else is actually not knowledge and can be invited in when it needs to be or when it's necessary or convenient. But also, like, Western knowledge is understood because it is not uncivilized knowledge, right? It's like not coming from information from uncivilized places, right? That have been deemed that for many years, like it stands alone in its separation from holistic methods, right? Or other things, like it creates its definition in what it's not in a lot of times. And so like I also think that like some of like what you experience is just like, yeah, like through like modernity and to get to this place, right? Objectivism of what we, or this false notion of objectivism mean to like dismiss things that are not seen as objective, right? But I also like going back to like your experiences, I would say that like that battle was fought on indigenous like knowledge bases, right? Where like that, I would say those harms and those violences that you experience now, in that realm. And then I would say that like what was borrowed was that stance against indigenous language, like that stance or that position. It was borrowed and understood, and those arguments were made on the backs of like indigenous knowledge, and then can be like reified to other knowledge bases based on those battles where we discredited, you know, indigenous knowledge for a very long time. So I mean, I just like I see like some of those original harms happening with that, and like how you have to validate yourself in that way, like, you know what I'm saying, like is like intergenerational, you know, in that way. But then also like I'm just thinking about like in this argument from my viewpoint, like one thing that I think is at risk when we talk about fully embracing AI is another way to slip objectivism as the dominant way of thinking, the dominant thought, because we're saying that like AI is built on data. Data is purely objective. It's always trying to like be fought through that, and then like we are like, it's, I don't know, coded or embedded in like data, AI, objectivism, Western thought. Those are like all of my lineages that I will go back when we talk about even ontologies. Thank you.
You want a question, David?
Oh, sure.
So I really appreciate the fact that you were here to tell us more about environmental impact. We can't talk enough about that. And I know that you are new to what we call critical AI studies. And I appreciate that as well. And I love your sense of fun, you know, that you are willing and open to talk to Brock. But you have a wry sense of humor. So it's not easy to tell how ironic you're being when you say that we are, you know, that there's another kind of resistance that we might want to think about, which involves directly engaging systems. I mean, one of the many things that conversation did was use up a lot of water and blow through those generators, right? You know, like, I'm sure you know all those facts. So that's one thing. We're not outside the belly of the whale in that sense. There are ways to hack rock. There's ways to hack all of, that's one of their many harms, is that they leak data with ease, and you can get them to do very harmful things. And people are doing them every day of the week. But it would require much more than getting a subscription for you to jailbreak Grok in such a way that you've got it to tell every user that with every query that it, you know, requires access to this data center. Nor is it clear that that's even the best way for users to know that, right? Like, I think that there are more energy efficient ways. So I wonder how serious you are. I mean, there is hacktivism, and people do know how to do it, and it is a strategy. And there is play. You know, one of the things that we try to do with Design Justice Labs is to get ordinary undergraduate students to engage these models as researchers by probing for their failure modes and then documenting their results so that they get out of that sort of, you know, this is so magical, or I'm just the user, what do I know? You know, they actually think this thing is different than what I've been led to believe. So I also approve of that, but like, I can't tell exactly where you stand by the end of that, if you've been enchanted or if you're being wry.
Well, I wasn't sure myself, but I want to talk to you about ways to jailbreak the thing. I was a bit enchanted, frankly, because my previous experience with ChatGPT, and we've talked about this, the notebook LM, which would never call a computer a beast, I don't think. You know, at moments of technological change, I wonder what spaces open up to hack or subvert or appropriate the technology. And I'm also aware, I'm also trying not to be seduced because, this gets back to your question about adopting AI. You know, I'm a Luddite. I really am a Luddite. And Ludd opposed a very particular technology called the card for making textiles. And the card replaced skilled humans. And the card did a good enough job.
Mm-hmm.
And it made cheap clothes mass produced, right? And so I'd be very interested in the next panel, because the question is whether AI is not enough, whether to what extent is it replacing? I don't know. I want to see though how we could subvert it without adopting it, or does it require adopting it to subvert it?
Well, I think that's a perfect, you know, you've put three big questions on the table. One, does AI actually, is it good enough? I think most people would, well, is it good enough? Is it enchanting? Can we subvert it? And those are great questions. And do you want to have the last word, Dalaki?
No matter what I answer, it's technically is, so. I'm not gonna say no, but then that would have been an oxymoron, so. No,
I want to add one thing, not to sound serious, but the day that AI can be produced in an energy efficient manner, but on a level of human intelligence, as far as like what it can make and how it can make its own choices, that's where it gets scary.
Right, the day that it can make its own choices, but there's no path from Grok to an AI that makes its own choices. None. If that's what's keeping you up at night, and this is what I'll be saying in my talk, let something else keep you up at night. There's just no path. I can tell you're there, as there.